The crystalline console pulsed red, and Kael Winterborn wondered if this was how the world ended, not with conquest or catastrophe, but with a temperature gauge climbing past the point of no return. 300 years of maintaining the deepest freeze in recorded history, and some bureaucrat with a geology degree was about to undo it all with good intentions and thermal drilling equipment. Magnificent, he muttered, frost crackling from his breath as he studied the readouts. Absolutely brilliant. Save the planet by melting the one thing keeping it from being devoured. The fortress around him groaned, ice shifting against ancient stone, the sound of a tomb settling deeper into its grave. Kael had built this place when the world was younger and considerably less convinced it knew everything. Back then, people understood that some things stayed frozen for excellent reasons. His reflection stared back from the console's surface. Pale skin stretched over sharp cheekbones, silver-white hair that had stopped aging sometime around his 100th year, and eyes the color of Arctic storms. Not bad for someone whose job description included eternal vigilance against cosmic horror. The ladies used to love the whole mysterious Ice King aesthetic. These days, most people assumed he was either a relic or a terrorist. Sometimes both, depending on the news cycle. The thermal readings spiked again. Deep beneath the permafrost that formed his kingdom's foundation, something vast stirred in its prison of ice and time. The Devourer, the thing his ancestors had died to contain, was beginning to wake up. Kael pressed his palm against the console, channeling what remained of his power into the failing containment grid. Ice spread from his touch, but it felt thin, fragile, like trying to hold back an ocean with a paper dam. "Come on," he whispered. "Just a little longer." But he could feel it failing. 3 centuries of maintaining the deepest magical freeze in existence had drained him almost dry. He was running on fumes and bitter determination, and neither would last much longer. The communication array crackled to life, projecting a holographic news feed into the air above the console. Dr. Elena Voss's face materialized, all earnest brown eyes and confident smile, as she stood before the Valoris geothermal facility. "Our new deep core extraction process will provide clean energy for the entire northern continent," she announced to a crowd of reporters. "By tapping into previously inaccessible thermal sources, we're pioneering a revolution in sustainable power generation." Kael snorted. Revolutionary, right? Because nobody's ever thought to dig holes in the ground before. But he studied her face carefully. Elena Voss didn't look like a villain. More like someone who genuinely believed she was saving the world. Which, in Kael's extensive experience, made her infinitely more dangerous than any cartoon megalomaniac. "The environmental impact will be minimal," Elena continued. "Our models show no significant disruption to local ecosystems." "Your models," Kael said to the projection, "don't account for the interdimensional parasites sleeping under my backyard." The truth was, he'd tried explaining it through official channels. 3 years ago, he'd sent carefully worded letters to the Valoris Environmental Council, the Department of Energy, even the Premier's office. He'd been diplomatic, reasonable, professional. The responses had been equally diplomatic, reasonable, and professionally dismissive. Ancient ice magic wasn't recognized by the Valoris Scientific Authority. Claims about sleeping cosmic entities required peer-reviewed evidence. Perhaps Mr. Winterborn would be interested in discussing mineral rights for his territory. They'd offered to buy his kingdom. Like it was a real estate transaction instead of a supernatural containment facility. The hologram flickered as Elena answered questions from reporters. Someone asked about local resistance to the project. "We understand some traditional communities have concerns," Elena said carefully. "But progress requires us to move beyond outdated superstitions. The age of kings and magic is over. This is the era of science and cooperation." Kael laughed, the sound bitter as winter wind. "Superstitions, right? Because 300 years of successfully preventing the apocalypse counts as folklore now." He dismissed the hologram with a gesture, but Elena's words echoed in the chamber. The age of kings and magic is over. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was just a relic clinging to relevance in a world that had moved beyond him. But the Devourer didn't care about progress or scientific authority. It had been old when the first humans learned to make fire, and it would still be hungry long after the last star burned out. The only thing keeping it dormant was the intricate web of ice and binding spells his ancestors had woven into the bedrock itself. a web that Elena's thermal drills were systematically shredding. The console chimed again, another temperature spike, deeper than before. Kael felt the responding drain on his power as the containment grid struggled to compensate. At this rate, he had maybe 6 months before complete system failure. 6 months to convince a world that had forgotten him that their greatest nightmare was about to wake up. Or 6 months to do something about it himself. Kael studied the facility schematics he'd acquired through less-than-legal means. The Valoris geothermal plant sat directly above the Devourer's prison, its deep-core drills punching through layer after layer of carefully maintained permafrost. Elena's team thought they'd found a massive geothermal vent. They had no idea they were drilling into a creature that existed partially outside normal spacetime. "Well," he said to the empty chamber, "I always wanted to see the world beyond these walls." The decision crystallized like frost on glass, sharp, clear, and probably going to cut him deeply. He couldn't convince them from a distance. Official channels had failed. That left unofficial ones. Time for the Ice King's final march. But first, he needed to figure out how to explain interdimensional parasites to someone who thought magic was a quaint historical curiosity. Elena Voss seemed intelligent enough. Maybe she'd listen if he could present the evidence properly. Or maybe she'd have him arrested as a delusional terrorist. Either way, it beat sitting in his fortress watching the world end through a crystal ball. Kael began gathering supplies, his movements efficient despite the weariness in his bones. 3 centuries of isolation were about to end, one way or another. Time to discover if the modern world was ready for ancient truths. The Valoris geothermal facility hummed with the kind of confident energy that came from believing you were saving the world. Kael crouched on a maintenance walkway above the main drill platform, watching Elena Voss coordinate her team with the focused intensity of someone who'd never doubted her place in the universe. Lucky her. Thermal output is steady at 47% above projections, Elena called out, consulting a tablet that probably cost more than most people's houses. Whatever's down there, it's bigger than we thought. If only she knew, Kael mused. The Devourer wasn't big in any conventional sense, it existed across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. But explaining that would require admitting magic was real, and Elena struck him as the type who'd need peer-reviewed evidence before accepting that water was wet. He'd been studying the facility for 3 days, using what remained of his ice magic to slip past security systems and observe the operation. The thermal readings Elena's team was celebrating matched his worst-case scenarios perfectly. The Devourer was stirring, drawn by the heat and vibration of the drilling operation. And Elena had no idea she was giving it exactly what it needed to break free. The irony was almost poetic. Here she was, trying to harness clean energy to save the environment, while unknowingly preparing to unleash something that had devoured entire ecosystems before humans evolved opposable thumbs. A security guard passed beneath his perch and Kael held perfectly still. His ice magic could bend light around him, but the effect was getting weaker every day. Soon he'd be nothing more than a cranky ex-king with a fantastic story nobody would believe. Elena moved to a bank of monitoring equipment, her brow furrowed as she studied the displays. "Marcus, are you seeing these seismic readings?" Her assistant, a nervous young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, hurried over with another tablet. "The microtremors are increasing, but they don't match normal geological patterns. It's almost like..." "Like what?" "Like something down there is moving." Elena's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Finally, someone was asking the right questions. Kael made his decision. Time for dramatic entrances and desperate gambles. He dropped from the walkway, ice crystallizing around him to slow his fall. The security alarms started screaming immediately, but Elena's team was too focused on their instruments to notice him until he was standing directly behind her. "Dr. Voss," he said conversationally. "We need to talk." She spun around and Kael found himself looking into the most intelligent brown eyes he'd encountered in decades. Elena didn't scream or call for security. She studied him with the same focused intensity she'd been applying to her instruments. "You're him," she said. "The Ice King. Kael Winterborn. Guilty as charged. Though I prefer to think of myself as your friendly neighborhood cosmic horror prevention specialist." Security guards were converging on their position, weapons drawn. Elena held up a hand, stopping them. "What do you want?" "To save your life. Also everyone else's lives, but I'm starting with you because you seem reasonable." "By breaking into a secure facility?" "By stopping you from drilling into something that should stay buried." Kael gestured toward her instruments. Those readings you're celebrating? That's not a geothermal vent. It's something that was old when your ancestors were learning to use tools, and it's waking up because you've been poking it with thermal drills for 6 months. Elena's eyes narrowed. You're talking about the creature from your letters. The Devourer. So you did read them? I read everything, including the psychological profile the council commissioned. Isolated individuals sometimes develop elaborate fantasy systems to cope with. The facility shuddered. Not the gentle vibration of drilling equipment, but a deep, resonant tremor that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Elena's instruments went haywire, displays flickering between normal readings and impossible spikes. That wasn't normal, Elena said, her voice tight with sudden alarm. No, Kael agreed. It wasn't. The tremor came again, stronger this time. Something in the depths let out a sound that was felt rather than heard, a subsonic cry of hunger that had been building for 3 centuries. Elena stared at her instruments, watching thermal readings spike beyond anything her equipment was designed to measure. This is impossible. The temperature down there just jumped 200 degrees in 30 seconds. Your drilling operation destabilized the containment matrix, Kael explained, ice beginning to form around his feet as his power responded to the crisis. The Devourer feeds on thermal energy. Every degree of heat you've been pulling up has been making it stronger. Containment matrix? Elena's scientific skepticism warred with the evidence of her instruments. You're talking about some kind of technological system? Biothermal engineering. My ancestors figured out how to create localized temporal distortions using structured ice formations. Very advanced stuff, though they called it magic because they didn't have better terminology. The facility shook again. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see the drilling platform beginning to buckle. Whatever was rising from below was big enough to warp metal just by getting close. Elena's face went pale. If you're right, if there's really something down there, then we need to evacuate the facility and seal the drilling shaft. Too late for that. Kael could feel his power draining as he fought to reinforce what remained of the containment grid. Your drills punched through the primary barrier 3 days ago. All I've been doing since then is buying time. Then what do you suggest? Kael studied her instruments, his mind racing through possibilities. Your thermal regulation system, it's designed to control heat distribution, right? Of course, but what if we reversed it? Instead of extracting heat, what if we used it to create a controlled freeze zone? Elena's eyes widened as she understood. Combine your ice magic with our technology. Create a hybrid containment system. Assuming your equipment can handle the thermal differential. And assuming I have enough power left to initialize the process. Another tremor shook the facility, and this time they could see cracks spreading across the drilling platform. Something vast and hungry was rising toward the surface, drawn by centuries of accumulated heat. Elena began working frantically at her control station. I can reconfigure the system, but I'll need precise temperature control at the quantum level. Can your magic handle the kind of fine manipulation? Kael felt the last of his strength flowing into the failing containment grid. Ask me in about 30 seconds. The Devourer's presence pressed against the barriers of reality, eager to taste a world it had been denied for so long. Kael could feel its alien intelligence probing for weaknesses, testing the boundaries of its prison. But Elena's thermal regulators were online now, creating controlled cooling zones throughout the facility's infrastructure. Her technology and his magic began to resonate, creating something neither could have achieved alone. It's working, Elena breathed, watching impossible readings stabilize on her instruments. The temperature differential is creating a quantum lock effect. Kael collapsed against the control station, his power finally exhausted. For the first time in 3 centuries, he felt completely, utterly human. Is it contained? Elena nodded, her eyes wide with wonder and fear. For now. But Kael, this changes everything. If magic is real, if there are things like the Devourer out there, then maybe the age of kings and magic isn't over after all, Kael finished. Maybe it just needed to learn how to work with the age of science and cooperation. Outside, the sun was rising over a world that didn't know how close it had come to ending. Elena and Kael stood together in the aftermath, 2 people from different eras who had found a way to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. The Ice King's final march was over. But perhaps Kael Winterborn's first steps into a larger world were just beginning. So, Elena said eventually, "Want to help me rewrite the laws of physics?" Kael smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed in decades. Dr. Voss, I thought you'd never ask.